So many years ago, I became a tattoo artist, in love with tattooing. When I entered tattooing, I knew 3 other people my age. So I was sort of stuck between the older crew and I was the young crew. So it's taken quite a while to amass a really good collection of stuff. And my goal is to just sort of show how tattooing has evolved. So I'm going to flick through this stuff here and just sort of give some little bullet points and talk. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A. Then right at the back, Jeff Rhodes, he'll be mentioned in here, one of my esteemed colleagues and mentors. If I get anything wrong, he's going to correct me. So feel free to say hi to him as well at the end. He's a very charismatic man. And also go over to the PTAA booth. They're big supporters of tattooing. They've been like guardians of the industry for a good 30 years. Just recently, there's been some stuff going on in Queensland where the government wants to outlaw tattooing. So these sort of people, they come in and they talk on a factual level, common sense level when you're dealing with government departments that allow us to have this industry continue to thrive. So they've got a raffle on, buy some tickets and support them. All right, so Australian tattoo history, 2016. I'm going to say it was a different time, so a little bit of a trigger warning here. There could be some images that might be biker related, might be seen to be crazy. So in this current state of the world, I just have to drop that and let you know. So here we go. Testing. Well, technical malfunction. Oh, here we go, cool. So what we've got here is some flash by a guy called Bob Wood. And funnily enough, there you can see some heavy biker-related images. So Bob was an amazing tattooer, started off around the Bankstown area, East Hills, and you can see these designs, they're quite crude. Like this is like an era of when Sailor Jerry was around. There's a lot of like biker culture, dragons, chicks, crazy stuff, and it just sort of reflected what was available at that time. It's an introduction of contents to this book that you can no longer buy, that's a collector's edition. So here is some stuff showcasing tattooing. This is a guy called Shane Green. He's an amazing collector of business cards, and I think he's got something like over 600,000 individual pieces of artwork. Business cards, stickers, postcards, everything. So in our next slide, we'll get here. So Green Lantern, showing tattooing, Sailor by the look of it, and a selection of assorted business cards. So this is an era when some shops didn't even have a phone in it. It was very localised. People would just have the address. People would carry around wallets with business cards, loads of money, all that sort of thing. They'd meet someone at a bar, maybe swap cards. That was their way of advertising things. So you can see here I know it's a small screen, but like little bit of selection showcasing the artist's sort of individuality. So here is Greg Ardron, no longer with us, one of Jeff Rhodes' best mates. They worked together at this studio called Sleeve Masters in King's Cross for close to 20 years, Jeff? Yeah. So what's interesting about this studio, it's one of the times when tattooing really started to change. I think Greg took it over in about the mid-80s. And around that time, probably around that 10-year period, there were a lot of new things introduced into the industry, like what we take for granted now, like a photocopier or a stencil machine or, heaven forbid, a sterilizer or even gloves. So it was a time of great change. And you look here, Greg, like rock and roller, King's Cross in the middle of that time was the craziest place in Australia, if not on earth. Like, the red light district was wild. So Jeff and Greg used to work, I think, Thursday to Sunday from, 4 p.m? Yeah, 7 p.m. till 4 a.m. And there were many times when they would just work straight through. Like some great stories I got from Greg and backed up from Jeff was, should I be pointing this somewhere? There we go. So here we go again. Here's a bit of Greg's flash. You can still see the crazy biker image because back then, unlike today, there are so many different subcultures and areas that we can align with and cross over in the community at large. But back then, you could maybe be a biker, you could play footy, you could play cricket, you could like rock and roll. There weren't as many things out there. So these designs are just showcasing what people would get from those cultures. Here is a little selection of photos of people from around that time. It was a super famous shop. They ran that studio without a phone number for many, many years. Reason being, they were smack bang in the heart of darkness. So if anyone wanted to find them, they knew where to go. People are just coming in and out all the time, leaving messages, leaving notes. And it was like a meeting point. King's Cross at the time had about 2 or 3 other studios. They were all friendly. It was just a melting pot. Exchange of ideas, exchange of designs. I remember hearing funny stories when the sailors would come in and just flood the streets to get tattooed. Sailors would come in and go, oh mate, how much is that eagle? Say that's $300. They'd think it was too much. They'd go down to Max's shop down the road. The boys would ring up Max and go, a bunch of sailors are coming in, they're tight asses, bump the prices up. So they'd ask for a similar eagle and Max would say $350. And then they'd come back to Sleeve Masters and then that became a $400 tattoo. So, you know, it was just a good lot of fun and banter and good stuff going on. Another picture, so Greg travelled a hell of a lot. So that main picture here is Greg over in the UK, late 89 Tattoo Expo. So before the internet was around, the only real way to exchange information was either writing letters, putting photos in it, or literally travelling yourself. So Greg went around the world many times. He was a state rep of the PTAA. He wrote columns in many tattoo publications, both published to the general public and trade publications, and had tattooing's best interest at heart. So these are the guys that really sort of started to crack it all open and push the boundaries. And what I really love as well is because in that time, you could just put the sign above a door that said tattoo and you could be busy, right? The general public's acceptance of tattooing was pretty low. You didn't have to really strive that hard. But Sleeve Masters, Max's, Tony Cohen, a few other people, they really pushed the boundaries. They did the homework when financially they didn't have to. They did it for the love of it and helped develop the art to push it to where it is today. So here we go again, very biker stuff. Oz Bike was one of the first publications to start showcasing tattooing. We then went on to have quite a few dedicated tattoo magazines, which are now, 20, 30 years later, non-existent. Everything's on the gram, everything's on TikTok. So it's interesting to see in a period of time how crazy things have changed. So obviously Greg, showcasing cross graphics before it became Sleeve Masters, you know, bike in the shop, bike out the shop. King's Cross always been renowned for somewhat of a seedy underbelly. You can still go through there now and see slight remnants of it, but there's still old school bikers that park their bikes out the front and hang out there. More international tattoo. So this is a trade journal. So Greg would give information not only on Sydney, but the rest of Australia, what was happening. So other tattoo artists around the world that subscribed to these trade mags could get an idea of what was going on. Because again, there's no internet, there's no email, that sort of thing. Even to travel back then was difficult. You couldn't just get on Expedia. Flight Centre didn't exist. So it was very hard and difficult to do these things, let alone get tattoo supplies. These days you can buy everything off Amazon, eBay, even here today. So it was a very guarded trade and the secrets were held very close to their heart. So if you wanted to buy tattoo equipment back then, you would have to write a letter to either England or America to a tattoo supply company, prove that you were a tattoo artist with, say, a business card or even better, a referral. Quite often, these supply companies would ring up your studio and check that you actually worked there. So old school guardians, they didn't want it to become a free-for-all. Then they would send you back what's called a pro forma invoice. I think I got that correct, Jeff? And then you would have to then go, you'd get your tally of what you wanted, have to go to the bank, make a bank check, which I don't even think exists anymore, send it over. There's about a 3-month process to get your equipment. So very different time. Sleeve masters, another trigger warning. Greg was one of the craziest, wildest designers. So here is a crazy image. And the craziest thing about this is he has 3 girls and he sent them to primary school in these t-shirts and got a phone call from the principal asking him to bring another t-shirt. A different time. Another great image, this is probably the t-shirt he put them in, but a very distinct style. Greg, beautiful banners, beautiful lettering, all this sort of stuff, very distinctive style. And in tattooing in general, like the highest thing you can aim for is to have your style instantly recognisable. Whether that be by other tattoo artists is great, but also customers is even better. So that's when you're building your personal brand, and you can walk around here today and you can see that in a lot of people. So, for example, traditional tattooing is amazing, but a lot of it can look the same. There's a few people, whether it be colour palette, line weight, design style, they start to get their own individual voice. And Greg was definitely one of the pioneers of that. So here's some early flash. This is from early 80s. So I'm going to go back. So here's early 80s. Let me go back. And so this would probably be around the late 80s to 90s. So you can see his skill levels really jumped up in the design. So that just came from what I was talking about before, after work, being open to custom work and just putting in the hours and drawing. And as tattoo artists, sometimes it's hard to stay motivated and to draw because it's pretty lonely and isolating. So, Greg was bringing up 3 kids, running a crazy shop, but he pushed himself to the next level. And all those guys in that studio and the other studios that I mentioned. So again, here, early 80s stuff. So this would have been redrawings from what we call production flash, where from a tattoo supply company, you could buy a bunch of pre-printed designs, then you would then colour them in yourself and then just style it up. So, koi, crazy stuff. And so interestingly enough, back in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't really give away Japanese style tattooing. It wasn't as popular as it is today. But through a lot of people that pushed, a lot of tattoo artists would get this style, and now it's, one of the strongest styles out there. Again, another example of classic drawing, up-leveling with their skills. And the interesting thing is, Australia never really had tattoo artists that were doing watercolour painting as we see in America. Everything was fine line tips or textures or pencils. So it's a very uniquely Australian thing. More examples of cool flash, if only those prices were available today. Yeah, all the classics, eagles, roses, daggers, hearts. Yeah, good old Navy stuff. Yeah, and a lot of people back then, you could rock into a tattoo shop and just get an outline. You didn't have to get the whole thing. So say that tiger head's $100, you would expect to maybe pay $50 just for the outline and then come back and get it coloured when you had another $50. So again, this is later stuff. So we'll just scroll through this and then we'll get to something more. What the hell is a PTA? So PTAA, so Professional Tattoo Artists Association of Australia. As I mentioned before, like guardians of the industry. So this is just an article that Greg would have written for a general publication for the general public. Tattoo Convention at the Gazebo Hotel in Sydney, 1992. So apart from maybe this one here, this is probably the other tattoo convention that was done in a very highly publicly viewed area. Over the last so many years there, at convention centres, all this sort of stuff, which is still amazing. But this really put tattooing on the map. And in the early 90s, King's Cross was one of the craziest areas tourists, locals, interstate people, overseas people. So they really did their best to showcase tattooing to the general public in a great way. Some other legends, we've got Max Chater down the bottom, Pete Davidson, Arm. Hey, Jeff, is Arm coming this weekend? Oh, here we go. I'm going to get Arm on stage later today and you guys are going to have a treat. Have to definitely do a trigger warning for Arm. So Bev Robinson, Cindy Ray, she was one of the original tattooed models, got heavily tattooed in the 60s and is a great ambassador for female tattooing, one of the first ones to sort of help pave the way for a lot of you ladies today. Graham Spence, great friend of Jeff's up the back, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Graham was an amazing tattoo collector and ambassador for tattooing. And I mentioned before that guy Flea with that over 600,000 pieces of tattoo history. He inherited a lot of it from Graham. So back in the day, there were a lot of collectors. People were collecting a lot of stuff. And Graham was one of the biggest. Graham's side piece. And, you know, just looking here as well, you can see how tattooing's changed. Cindy Ray, you know, very iconic. Dame Edna Everage glasses there, incredible fashion, and just sort of paved the way for the ladies of today. Books, publications, designs, even like, actually, you've got this book at the PTAA booth, don't you, Jeff? Yeah. So you can go over and get an official bootleg copy of it. Maybe even a fake signature on there. So early Cindy Ray Flash. So you get an idea of seeing how it's evolved. So this is classic production flash that I was mentioning before. All right, Tony Cohen, like one of the kings of Sydney tattooing, the Illustrated Man, which has been around for a long time. Tony's had a great career. He's 75 and hopefully going to be here this afternoon. Started off out in St. Mary's, I think, in the late or early 60s. Another guy that pushed himself and travelled the world and was a hub of information, bringing it back to Australia, sharing that information with the artists that worked for him, that then shared it to the customers, and then those customers would be bouncing between tattoo shops. You'd be taking photos of other artists' works because information sharing wasn't as free as it is today. So your secrets were guarded quite carefully. Tony's had an amazing career, still tattooing today. It was a family-run business. His wife would work in the shop, his daughter worked in the shop, and his son Brett tattoos there now for easy 30 years too. So yeah, Tony, his iconic doors were on Elizabeth Street, his old studio, had a big great wave painted to it. It was a very iconic studio that was unfortunately demolished about 10 odd years ago or more, and he's moved directly across the street from it now in a more modern premises. So, you know, classic images, Tony, rocking the beard. Like Tony's had a mad life. He's been an amazing tattooer. He's right in the music industry. He was in a bike club called the Mob Shitters, and he was also into Wild West shooting. So he's lived multiple lives in one and pushed the level on all of them. So this is Tony tattooing another legend called Dutchie, who's no longer with us, and another guy called Bill Phillips, who's no longer with us as well. So what I love now is seeing a lot of younger people in the industry are starting to emulate these older guys, whether it be design or fashion or haircuts. So it's interesting to see, I think is the correct way. So, but it's cool. It's a style that's getting rocked out, and you know they're almost trying to live in these guys' shadows or take it to another level, which is cool. You know, more designs from Tony's studio. You know, so a lot of people would have a black backboard. Tony had yellow, orange. Everyone was changing things up to try and stand out from the crowd. You know, black work started to become popular, so you didn't need to use colour. You know, it appealed to a different audience. What else have we got coming up here? Here we go. So Alex and Max Chater. Alex Chater, the Chater family are 3 generations of tattooers here in Sydney. So Alex is the king, Alex Painless Chater. His son, Max Chater, tattooed under him for a long time up in Paddington. It's Max in the bottom corner. and now Max's son, Zach, tattoos as well for a long time too. So Alex started, I think, in maybe the 1930s and tattooed for a long time in Elizabeth Street near the back of Central Station, and then moved up to Paddington near an army barracks. So army people are getting a hell of a lot of tattoos, so you move to that area. After Alex passed away, Max stayed there for quite a few years and then moved into King's Cross. And he worked for a guy, became partners with a guy called Big Pete. And then after Big Pete moved away, Max has ran the studio for a long time himself. And he recently sold it to one of the Golden Greeks here, Pete Tiliakos, up in that top left-hand corner. And Max is now the owner of Sleeve Masters. And he's been the owner on and off of it for quite a few years. So some more business cards, some T-shirts, just showcasing the designs of the day. This is Alex. That's the shop in Paddington. That shop's still there. I think now it's some sort of high-end beauty salon. So how times have changed. And this is Alex tattooing a guy called Valentine Green down the bottom, who was one of Australia's most tattooed people at that time. You know, a little bit of sideshow work, just like an early person rocking out a full, what would now be considered a trad-based bodysuit. Just lots of little bangers all over you. Here we go again, the Golden Greeks, Nick and Pete Tiliakos. They both started out working for a guy called Wally Hammond in the Cross when they were both teenagers. Nick's now retired, but Pete's still tattooing out of Max's village shop. I know that you sort of get the idea. So yeah, so in the Cross in the day, down the bottom, we've obviously got an international Japanese businessman that's visited, just dropping by. All sorts of people would come through the Cross at that time because it was obviously the melting pot and the fun capital. So there you go again, yellow background, some examples of designs that were done by Pete in that studio at that era. Again, biker stuff, still popular. Hot stuff, kangaroos, mushrooms, Taz. So Bob Wood started off with Big Pete that I mentioned before out in East Hills. So, and this is a time where there were probably 5 studios in Sydney. So I think around the late 50s, they started tattooing out of a studio out the back of Big Pete's mum's house. Big Pete was also a champion heavyweight boxer and a huge man. So there's stories of like the youngsters lining up in the backyard. Big Pete had come out, give him a clip around the ear, tell him to stop swearing because his mum was in the house and she could hear. But what I love about Bob Wood, so Greg, before Greg passed away, he had a large collection of Bob Wood designs. So myself and a bunch of others, we would go out and hang out with Greg all the time, and we bought a lot of these designs and flash. And there's been a real resurgence in Sydney history and Sydney style tattooing. So I think we're going to get some more designs here. So yeah, so I mentioned there's Bob's shop at the bottom. There's a few artists and studios. Probably the most well-known one at the moment is Tattoo Rosie's. They've got a big collection of Bob Wood original sheets. And one of the artists there, Caleb, is considered Bob Wood reincarnated, or basically built his career off the back of a lot of Bob's designs. But he's now at the point where he's taking it to his own level and finding his own voice through this heavy tradition. And that studio is really pushing the resurgence of 80s, 70s and 80s trad tattooing and taking it to a new level. So like trad tattooing is back huge. Like years ago it started with Sailor Jerry when he became reignited on the scene, but it's really good to see that we've got local Aussie stuff being used and being, you know, embraced by Sydney-siders. There's still plenty of old boys rocking around the streets here in Sydney. You see the tattoos on them. I quite regularly go up and talk to them and take photos of them and hear the stories. And the crazy thing is, a lot of these guys were getting tattooed when they were like 13, 14 years of age. So pretty wild times. So yeah, more classic designs, just set to that era. But, you know, Bob had his certain way, his certain style. He was also known for building amazing tattoo machines and mixing his own amazing colour. So another area where you would have your own artistic identity. It could be a colour palette, it could be line weight, or the way that you would put the colour in and make it saturated. So yeah, Tattoo Rosies is here, PTA is here, they're in the same row. So go past and check out these designs and you'll be inspired. Here's some of Bob's machines that he built. So where we've evolved to today, tattooers now no longer have to be craftsmen. We just need to be artists and evolve from there. So, and that's what's helped the industry artistically go through the roof and all these crazy styles be developed. But in this era, these guys had to work it all out themselves. Instead of waiting 3 months to get things from America, necessity is the mother of invention. So they would work things out, they would try new things, like whether they're using sewing needles or a different form of needle, and just becoming really, I'm not sure what the word is, you get the idea. So yeah, they really pushed the boundaries and did their thing. Like Bob was a builder of many, many machines that would then be sold to other tattoo artists that would then level up their game because they got something good to work with rather than not being able to tune anything themselves. Here's Bob and Big Pete at the East Hill studio. Like, you know, Siggy, no gloves, just living the dream. You know, like what a wild era. You know, the health department was probably not even on the scene back then. So it was a pretty lawless, wild time. And a lot of their clientele were just rough and tumble working class people. So if you didn't see it on the wall, you weren't going to get it. You know, later on, you can see the evolution of designs. These were drawn by Mike Malone, very famous tattooer from Hawaii for Big Pete when he would travel. Big Pete again, Big Pete, Greg, Jeff, and Joel. Yep. So, and this is inside Sleeve Masters back in the day. So yeah, some more articles on Big Pete, heavyweight boxer. He got disqualified many, many times from fighting. He was known as like the dirtiest man in the boxing industry, but also a heart of gold. Just an old school character. Everyone should know Angry Anderson, from my generation anyway, but he was one of the people that first started promoting tattooing to the masses via his band Rose Tattoo. So tattooed by Tony Cohen and a few others. So they're getting out there in that era of Rose Tattoo, AC/DC, the Angels, and the music culture brought together so many people and also inspired, like, then you've got Guns N' Roses. People want to look like Post Malone today, getting their faces covered. So everything is the same and the inspiration comes from somewhere. So, but Angry was really good as well because there used to be a daytime TV show called The Ray Martin Show. So once a week, Angry would be on it and it was called Angry Soapbox. And he would get up there and like talk about his views on the world, like championing the underprivileged, the homeless, the abused, this sort of thing. So he sort of was one of the first people that would have helped change the mum sitting at home watching daytime TV that, man, if you've got a bald head and you look rough and you're covered in tattoos, you're not a scumbag, like you are a normal person. And thankfully now, why this tattoo convention is here is because we're accepting of everyone. You know, this would have never happened here at this town hall. So thankfully society's moving along, but people like this have helped pave the way for all of our freedom of choices today. Nelson, another tattooer from out west, he's still rocking around. Hopefully he'll be here over the weekend. He looks like a bit of like... Nelson was Chilean, had no tattoos for quite a long time, and he looked like some sort of crazy Mexican, Chilean bandito guy mixed with Ned Kelly. So, but he's a great charismatic guy and has done a lot of good for tattooing over the years. Wally Hammond, another guy that had a shop in King's Cross, another crazy guy that built machines and did really well, but only supplied them inside the industry. You had to have a recommendation, but he was very famous for that stuff down the bottom, that orange. So Wally's orange was known worldwide, and if you could get that orange, it was like, to get it into the skin was you just think, man, my skills just jumped up another level, and it would stay there. And I've seen tattoos like 40, 50, 60 years old that it's still as bright as it is today. So there were all these little people that had little bits and pieces that helped level you up as an artist. And then once you started to put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together over the years is how you leveled up. Where today you can do an online masterclass. You know, you can talk to an artist and they're selling a colour set, a needle package set. So it was a real era of pioneering and just trying things out and doing their best and evolving. So here is some of Wally's cards, and in the top left-hand corner is a poem. A poem, Jeff? Yeah, so when people would work at Sleeve Masters and they would start to get a job, they would have to recite this poem that Wally Hammond owed with their hand on a Wally Hammond tattoo machine. So the guys take it very, very seriously, but also very tongue-in-cheek, and yeah, it's great stuff. I'm a very big romantic about all this stuff, so I get lost in it all. Tony Smudger Smith, a tattooer from up in Queensland. We'll just flick through this because we're just focusing mainly on Sydney. But again, you can see those style of design. Biker stuff was big influences. Here are some like photos of other well-known tattooers around that time. So you would get tattooers coming up from Melbourne, coming down from Queensland, driving down on a weekend to get a tattoo, to learn something, to party on with the guys, to stay up all night and talk shit and get information that you would be so amped on, like artists here are amped on this convention today. It's a knowledge sharing, gathering, and it's really cool. Hits and memories, some old flash, stencils. You know, even stencils back in the day, everything was hand-drawn. Now everything's printed off an iPad. So some of the big things that changed tattooing, I mentioned before, was a photocopier. Something that we take for granted now enabled you to go up, go down, flip it. You could do your own version of cut and paste and Photoshop, Procreate things together. Other things were a stencil machine, because all of this stuff had to be handmade. So tattooing as an artist was so labour intensive before you actually got to tattoo. So there was probably as much time behind the scenes doing things as there was actually on the skin. So it's for me, I come from a generation where I've seen this, and it's phenomenal to see where it is today and what's being created. This is the last page of this presentation today. Some amazing stuff here, just photos. I run an Instagram page called Australian Tattoo History. It's linked. I've been pretty slack on it the last couple of months, I apologise, but I've got some good things planned that will, hopefully I'll redeem myself. Give that a follow. Go to the PTAA booth, follow those guys. They're very active with promoting tattoo history. Thanks for listening to me. It's a passion project of mine. I'm overwhelmed to see so many people here that are interested in it. Appreciate you coming to the convention. We'll probably have a little break because I think the next guy is an apprentice talk and I think he's tattooing. So I'm going to run back. So if any of you do want to hang around, feel free to do so, or we're going to start the next one at 1 o'clock. So thanks so much. I appreciate your time and big love for you all.